Welcome back, everybody, to another edition of the Zach Starr Show. I am so excited to be here with all of you today. We have a really exciting guest coming up. First and foremost, I want to thank everybody that has spent the last week with us. It's been a lot of really good times. We've had a lot of really good interactions in the comments. We've had a good chance to interview. On Wednesday, if you were here, Jake Henry, who is the CEO and founder of Lectra, that was a really awesome conversation. He really ran away with it, which is always a good thing for the show. And of course, Monday, I had a chance to come on and give you all a brief introduction to the show, exactly what we're about, how and why I started this, and just to be able to take it from there and continue that conversation. That conversation will continue today in a minute with our special guest. And so, again, just thank you to everybody. It's been great. We've had a huge guest list, a lot of requests to come on. We're actually booked all the way up through early October. So anyone that's interested, please reach out. I enjoy these conversations. They're really helpful. They really help to give people perspective and understand different types of businesses. The term entrepreneur, which I think is used very loosely, and honestly, it's used a lot, it really is something that becomes vague, and people kind of get lost in exactly what kind of term that is, what kind of person is an entrepreneur. The truth is, there are so many different business ideas out there and so many different avenues that you can take. Entrepreneur by itself, it's a word that really it's just about visions, being able to be a visionary and seeing the vision that you need to carry out any kind of business venture or idea that you had. So on Wednesday, we had on someone who works specifically with athletic tapes. He had a chance to speak in great detail about his company, how he started at the prototype process. Today, we're going to go a little more software-based, a little more cloud-based, web development-based. And that specifically is a company by the name of xBound, which is helping semi-retired people, older, experienced people connect with companies. There are people that have a lot of experience in the industry. They might not be the newest out of college, but their experience is there. Their very slogan is experience matters. And I'd like to bring in none other than the CEO and co-founder of that company, Mr. Zave Smith. Now, actually, believe it or not, leading up to our show today, we were actually just doing some last-minute camera adjustments. That is because Zave is a seasoned photographer. That has been his bread and butter his entire life. So I apologize. The quality is not up to where we need it to be quite yet. It is going to be very soon. But at the very least, we do have some things in the works that we have gotten started with. So, Zave, I want to give you the floor, just an opportunity to give a little overview about yourself, and then we'll dive into how we met as well as talk a little bit about xBound.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. I actually wish we had included that set. Well, Zach and I were adjusting this camera. It was probably the best part of the show. Anyway, my name is Zave Smith. I actually now feel comfortable calling myself an entrepreneur since I now have 3 separate businesses that I manage and run and help promote and participate in. None of them on my own. It always takes a team. So as Zach mentioned, I'm a pretty well-known commercial photographer shooting for marquee clients like Disney and Capital One and Vanguard and every single drug company around. People ask me what I shoot. My pithy answer is drugs and money, because I do a lot of work for pharmaceuticals and financials. And I've been doing that on my own for about 32 years, and based here in Philadelphia, but I shoot all over the country. About 6 years ago, a friend of mine, a brilliant designer named Michael McDonald, one of the best in the country, approached me and said, Zave, you and I, we should start a design firm together. And I was always curious about what happens after I hand the photograph off to the ad agency or design firm. I said, sure, why not? So we brought in a third partner, a super guy I've known for a long time named Russ Napolitano. And we started Exhilarate, and that's a brand design company. We're just over 6 years old. Russ handles business development. Michael oversees, as a creative director, graphic design and all the design aspects of the studio. I handle any photography and video that comes their way and take care of the books and think about other things, strategy, long-term, where this company's going to go. Right before COVID, in the fall of 2019, I had this idea rattling in my head. In fact, I actually remember exactly where I was when this idea came to me. I was riding a bicycle up the Lehigh Valley Gorge Trail in the fall. It's a beautiful trail for any of you trail riders. And I had noticed a few trends. Number one, I have always noticed, let me just say this. If you're a commercial photographer, and especially if you go into corporations and shoot a lot of corporate executives, or do what we call business lifestyle, where you spend a day or two or three poking your nose around a company, you learn a lot. If you keep your ears open, your head open, your heart open, you learn a lot about companies and business. And one of the things I had noticed for years was if you're over 50 and you lose a job for whatever reason, it's very, very hard to get back on the horse. And it's something that always bothered me. I see these incredibly talented, mainly in advertising, but these incredibly talented people. And it took them a year or two to find the right job, and it just was heartbreaking. At least I felt it was such a waste and heartbreaking. So that was the first trend. The second trend I noticed is I'm at the stage in my life where I have friends who are retiring. And these were people with tremendous business skills or technical skills. But they had to leave the workforce maybe for physical reasons, or maybe they just didn't feel like working the 50 hours a week that they had been working for the last 30, 40 years. But they didn't want to just lay down, watch shuffleboard, watch the news, and complain about the government. They wanted to remain engaged, just maybe not on that full-time basis, that career track basis. And a lot of these people had so much left to give. One of the things I've noticed over the years is so many startups who reinvent the wheel. You have this idea for this really great new, here we go, headset. It's the first thing I saw on my desk, headset. And you design it, and it's fantastic, but you know nothing about logistics or procurement or marketing or finance or all the things that turn an idea into a product and a product into a business you might not be familiar with. So you can spend 5 or 10 years hacking it, which is what most startups do. Or maybe you bring a couple people who've been there and done that and really know how to do it, and they can help you maybe as a mentor or as a part-time basis, or maybe a few months on a project basis, help you get that startup launched. So this idea was rattling the back of my head. And when COVID hit, the photo business kind of shut down for a while because nobody wanted a guy like me going into an office that no one was at. So the photo business shut down. I thought to myself, well, I don't know anything about recruitment. I don't know anything about technology. I don't know anything about startups. So let's get this thing going. So I put together a team, and it's been interesting to see how the team's evolved over the last 2 years as we've slowly built this thing. But we're launched last summer, and now we're doing a relaunch. We had some things we had to overcome, so we're currently just launching again. And so that's the startup. It's called xBound, and it's xBound's mission is to connect people, highly experienced, late career and semi-retired talent, with the businesses and nonprofits who can benefit from their experience and their business wisdom.
Gotcha. So anyone who has the background on how we met, we actually met at the Angel Venture Fair. That's an event that I referenced on Wednesday on the show. It's an event in the Union League in Philadelphia every single year. It's the largest in the Northeast, where investors and entrepreneurs connect. And so we had an opportunity. We went on stage early in the event, gave a 30-second pitch. We had separate rooms where we gave our pitch decks. And then we spoke to tons of investors, advisors, and really anyone on that side of the business world throughout the entire day. It was a long day. I think we got there around 6 a.m. So I was quite tired by the end of it. And I said my pitch probably 100 plus times. You'd say, Zave, probably close to 100 times that day that we were going and talking to people. The reason I bring that up is because, number one, that's how we met. But number two, all these companies, I call them the COVID companies. And like you mentioned, we were just going into the pandemic when you really got your company up and running. It's around the same time that my company, Wasser Innovations, and my product Next, got up and running as well. So yep. We really are the COVID bunch that really at first may have not been seen as the regular stereotypical entrepreneur or corporate executive per se, but we had ideas. We went out running with them. And like you mentioned,
great companies are often launched during recessions. I mean, Microsoft and Apple were launched during a recession. Recessions are really hard for a lot of people, but for other people, it gives them a breathing room and an opportunity to go start something new. Recessions are also a time where you can also get other talent, usually at a discount. You can get things like office furniture or space. Of course, who needs office furniture and space nowadays? You can get these things often at a discount. So the recessions are great times to start a business. Of COVID wasn't a recession. It was just a weird period. And it just shook up the economy, shook up society on a global basis, in my opinion, in a way that we don't even comprehend what it did. The way it affected education and healthcare and even, I would argue that the present war in Ukraine is somewhat a manifestation, some of these societal shakeup of the COVID period. It's going to be looked back in history as being a really unusual time period. But, people like us go, let's go start a company.
For sure. I think almost every company I'd spoken to, I'd probably say out of the 30 companies that were there, at least half of them were started or really started to boom during COVID. So the evidence is there for the opportunity. We just got to put our work in for it. And I think that was the first in-person Angel Venture Fair since COVID. So it really was, for me at least, an awesome experience to pitch my company in person for the first time. Now, Zave, was that your first time pitching in person?
No, I had I was very lucky. About 6 months before that, the Venture Cafe here in Philadelphia, which is a wonderful institution, over on I think it's 37th or 36th in Market. Look it up, Venture Cafe. Every Thursday afternoon and evening, they have all sorts of programs and all sorts of idiots like me walking around. And it's a great place to learn a little bit and mingle. But anyway, the Venture Cafe decided to do what they call the on-ramp. And it was basically a 16-week accelerator, 12-week. I think it was a 12-week accelerator. And I got into that first on-ramp. And lo and behold, I won that first on-ramp competition, pitch competition. So that gave me a lot of confidence early on. Gave me a little bit of cash, like $5,000, but it gave me a lot of confidence early on to pitch. What I discovered with xBound is I have actually not been pitching much lately. And the reason is I realized that my company isn't quite ready for investors yet. It will be shortly, but I was pitching. I hate to say I was pitching prematurely because the reaction I got from people when I pitched helped me really rethink, how to operate this company and how to take it, what it needs to do. But I realized that I was not going to be raising money pitching right now. I have to overcome a few milestones. And once I overcome that, I'll be ready to pitch again. The difference will be, because I was pitching early, as a lot of investors know who I am. And a lot of investors were impressed with the idea and are watching. They have questions. And the biggest question is, who's that guy? I'm not your typical startup guy. And I don't have serious chops in the field I'm trying to get this thing started in. So they have some real okay, we like the idea. We see he's got a prototype in the market. We see he's getting a little traction, but can he really pull this off? Can he execute on the vision? And that's their big question mark. And I got to prove to them a little more that I actually can execute. And once I prove that, I think the investment money will come in. So doing those early pitching was probably very valuable to me, both helping me think conceptually and on a practical basis what I need to make this company, what I need to do with this company to make it work. It also laid the seeds for when I go back and earnestly pitch again. I think it won't be that hard to raise money. Of course, you never really know, but that's what I tell myself at least.
It's certainly easier said than done, but just to start on your premature pitching, I guess, in terms of just going out there, even though it was early, I agree. I think it still is a really good experience. Like you mentioned, number one, it gives you exposure. The fact that you can connect, I don't know what specific angel groups or VCs you talked to last year, but I know the few that I talked to, they're some of the most known in Philadelphia. So you have these companies in your back pocket, whether they remember you or not, to say we spoke to some of your team at the Angel Venture Fair. It does carry significant weight in terms of just getting in the room and getting a chance to pitch again. In which case, at that point, like you mentioned, it's about proving I'm the right person to carry this out. The prototype is there, the product market fit is there, and the team is there. And when all those pieces are put together, as long as you show where the money's going, why you need it, it adds significant value. And then finally, it's just experience, not just the exposure, but the experience itself when it comes to pitching. For me, that was my first time pitching in person. I'd done it
No,
at
I'm gonna.
least, yeah, I'd done it at least 15 or 20 times on Zoom, but you can't, it's not the same thing. Going on that stage for the first time, it's like 8 in the morning. We'd been there for 2 hours. I've been up since like 3:30, and I looked out to the crowd. It's a big crowd there. So it was certainly a great experience just to get in front of people, since I hadn't been able to do that before that.
Yeah, I think it's also important is that when you pitch, it's a job interview as a sales call, and it's people who are investors and angel investors. They see a lot of these things. So the question is, not only do you have to have a really good business idea, and you have to have a really good business plan, and that you have to have a really compelling market. You also have to be compelling and rememberable yourself. I think one of the things that is probably hard for most entrepreneurs is how to stand out a little bit in the marketplace with your idea. And not only your idea, but investors are investing as much in the person as they are in the idea. So I think
Agreed.
you're going to have to make sure that you leave them remembering who you are. And that often comes from good branding, consistent branding. It comes from being visible a lot. So it's not just going to one pitch competition and laying it all out there, unless you're extremely lucky and people go, oh my God, this guy has solved the problem of fusion, nuclear fusion. We got to invest in him because he's got a reactor going. Most of us don't have an idea that's quite that compelling. So you're going to have to make sure that you stand out. And I'm going to share a few secrets with you. Just, I'm not, when I appear in public, when I'm representing xBound, I'm always wearing purple, for example, because purple is the corporate color. And in a crowded room with 100 pitch guys, purple shirt, purple sport coat, purple hat, I stand out. Some people think I look like a used car salesman, but I stand out and people remember me. And it's also partly, Zach, you got the same thing. You have a name, Zach Starr, that's just a great, easy to remember name. And it's important that you make sure that your message is clear, concise, the business idea is clear, concise, and makes sense, and that you leave them so they have something to remember you by.
No doubt, like you said, they're investing in your idea, but unless they like you, they're not going to do that. And so
That's
it really
correct.
starts with who you are as a person. When they first talk to you, it's about the elevator pitch. They want to see how you deliver it. And within 10 seconds, you can tell how well somebody knows their company. And then at that point, if you start getting those hard, like I was pressed really hard by a couple investors last year at the fair. Once you get to that point, they, as much as they've seen in you, they believe that you know what you're talking about. They want to now actually learn about the company, as well as see how you perform under pressure, how well you perform when it comes to knowing your company. Can you answer these specific questions? Have you thought about this? Even if you're or myself are premature in terms of raising the money, it doesn't mean we can't have the answers to certain questions. What happens if a competitor comes out with something like this? What happens here? You should have at the very least a good understanding of how that works. At the end of the day, and you've already touched on this, I know I mentioned it a few minutes ago, but the final steps to raising that money, it's proof. It's called proof of concept for a reason. The concept should be there. Now it's about showing, are there people out there that are using the product? How are they perceiving it? Are they satisfied? Are they coming back and using it again? And it varies from industry to industry. My industry, your industry are two vastly different ones. And so the metrics are different. And at the core, they're both under the same idea that we have to prove consumers are going to use it. They're going to like it. They're going to refer it. They're going to use it again, depending on what that product is. In your case, actually, it's success when a consumer stops using it because they've successfully found a job. And
Right.
so it just varies from company to company as far as what your metrics are. But at the end of the day, it always comes back to that central message of proving that not only is your concept good and to an extent unique, but can it be repeated and have a successful repetition?
I also think, especially for early stage companies, investors are going to look for people with passion for their product. Starting a company, and even let's take Facebook right now. Okay, let's not talk about Facebook when it started. Right now, Mark Zuckerberg is facing some monumental issues with a very successful company, but he's still facing monumental issues, right? Any company, Ford Motor Company, been around for 100 years, right? No matter how successful your company is, no matter how long you've been at it, no matter how smart you are, you're going to, if you're running a company or a country for that matter, you're going to be constantly running into issues. And the question that a lot of investors are going to look at, both for early stage companies and later ones, is does the leadership team or the leader have the passion and the grit to work through problems and not to get stymied by them? Not to go off the deep end. If you look at, for example, WeWork, where I can't remember the guy who started that company. Excuse me. He got very full of himself. He spent money ridiculously, and he burned through it. And if investors had been looking a little more carefully at his personality and character, they might have avoided some of the disaster that happened. Pendleton, beautiful example. It's a great product, and I think the pandemic hurt that company tremendously, because what happened there was so predictable. I remember reading the newspaper and going, "Oh God, this is not the right thing to do." They had, the pandemic hit. Here was a company that was doing pretty well, growing steadily, building out their product, building out their team. Pandemic here hit, and suddenly everybody and their uncle wanted one of their bikes. So they borrowed and took a lot of investor money and expanded their capacity tremendously. And then the pandemic was over. And all of a sudden, nobody needs their bikes or wants them. And they have overcapacity in a saturated market. Boy, who couldn't see that coming? It was so predictable. I remember hearing an interview with the CEO of Giant Bicycles. They're based in Taiwan. They make like 80% of the world's bicycles. And during the pandemic, there was a huge shortage of bicycles, right? So this interviewer, I think it was from Marketplace, asked her if she's planning to build a new factory. And she goes, no. If I took $500 million, which is what it would cost me, and 3 years to build a new factory now, by the time I get it done, there might not be any demand out there.
Yeah,
but right now,
it's over.
Yeah. So, again, got way off on a tangent. Imagine me doing that. I got way off on a tangent, but one of the things investors are going to be looking for is passion. Do you have the passion and the willpower and the grit to overcome problems, not only in the beginning, but for the long haul?
Certainly. And I'll tell you this too. It's just for anyone out there who's watching that specifically is looking into being an entrepreneur, pitching your company. You can't fake it. You can't act passionate. It's not something that an investor will see right through that. If you're constantly
ask anyone who's been on a really bad date,
an acquisition or anything, yeah, that's for sure. It's very easy to sniff that out. And so, for me at least, I'm not constantly talking about an exit because I don't really care about that. We have goals and missions and objectives, and you want to be able to fulfill them for your company first and foremost. That's where it comes back to when an investor is investing in you specifically. And so it's very crucial that you demonstrate that passion again and again. You can't fake it. As tired as I can be, it can be the end of I remember I came back from a vacation in December, and I was down south, so it was frigid here. I'm cold. I'm in the grocery store. I don't really want to talk to anybody, but I caught up with a friend of mine's dad, and he starts asking me all these questions about my company, and I just flipped a switch. All of a sudden, you go from being lethargic and tired. You have no interest in talking to anybody. All of a sudden, you flip a switch, and you start talking about all these extensive questions. And I'm like, I did not think I was going to do that when I walked into this market today. So it really is something you can't fake it.
Always be selling.
You can't fake it for one pitch. If you can fake it for one pitch, you're not going to survive the due diligence process. I can tell you that right now, because it's that important. And like you mentioned, it doesn't matter how big a company is or how much it's worth. Really, you mentioned some of the largest companies in the world. Things will always hit the fan. And so there are always going to be situations where you have to be strong. You have to lead your team. And no matter how much money you make, no matter how successful you are, no matter how much Series A, B, C, whatever money you raise, at the end of the day, you have to be able to go out and stick your throat out there and be able to do what you need to ensure your company will survive.
Yep, I completely agree. Now, you mentioned a moment ago, Zach, a bit of a pet peeve of mine with the investment world. And I understand where it comes from, but you mentioned no matter what your exit strategy is. And I find that in my opinion, if you're starting a company and you're already worried about your exit strategy,
Forget it.
you probably shouldn't be starting that company. It's got to be something that you actually want to build. Now, I know with xBound, for example, that if I do this right, if I start this company right, at one point it will get bigger than my ability to manage it. I'm not a trained CEO. I didn't go to Harvard Business School, but that's okay. But that's not an exit. The thing is, I want to build a company. I see a problem and I want to solve the problem. And I want to solve it because I think the solution could be great for both companies and for older people. I mean, I hate to see waste. I hate to see people with a lifetime of experience just throw it away because they can't find their niche. And I hate to see companies, I remember a few years ago, I was doing a corporate capability brochure for a company that specialized in digital ad placement and SEO. And it's a very successful company. And I happened to wander into a conference room. And there was about, 15 people around the conference room. And I think one of them was old enough to have hit puberty by then. It's just full of young people. And one of the people raised their hand and asked a question. And the question was, and this is just a couple of years ago, the question was, what do we do if we're placing an ad for one of our clients and it ends up on a not so savory website? If it's a very political website or just a clickbait website, or God forbid, something that's completely illegal or unsavory. What's our policy about that? And I'm thinking, this is 2018. This problem should have been solved 10 years ago. Why is this even a discussion around this table now? Of course, I didn't say that, but that's what I was thinking. And I think that is a perfect example of why having a few seasoned people, even in a startup, but having a few people who've been around the block a few times can save you years of issues and growth and get you there much quicker. And it's because of that is really drives some of my passion for getting xBound started.
Certainly. And that's one thing too. Don't, especially when you're someone, like you said, you have a great idea, you have the leadership, the motivational skills to get skilled people in a room and work together towards your company, towards your goal. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. And that is so crucial. Don't waste years just because of your ego. Don't waste years trying to figure it out yourself if someone else has already done it. And when you bring them in, they're going to add substantial value. And really, that doesn't just go for, that's honestly an ad play for xBound too. I mean, there's people out there that probably could save companies the experience, the years of having to go through that by hiring them. So perhaps that's a two-way road to look at it. But that's certainly very true with the startup world. It is crucial that you know what you don't know, which is funny enough as it sounds. You have to know what you don't know and bring in the right people. That way you can spend time on what is important, which is the vision and the actual end goal.
I also think it's very important if you're an older person coming into a startup situation, especially, that you don't sit around and go, oh, it was better back then, back in the golden ages, or I told you so. That's not your role. Your role is to mentor and to teach and to help and to listen and to be a member of the team, not to be, the father figure, but to be a working member of the team. Because sometimes the way things were done a while ago weren't that good, which is why we've moved on. So you're there to share wisdom, and you're there to share your technical expertise, but you're not there to lecture, and you're not there to tell people, we knew it's better back then. It probably wasn't, actually. Anyone who thinks it was better back in the old days hasn't read enough history.
Absolutely. I mean, it's so easy I'm not going to say it's easy to build a successful company, because it certainly is not, but it's easier to access the resources needed to do that. And so when it comes to veteran employees or veteran executives that are brought into a startup, again, they want to mentor, they want to give their feedback and their perspective. But at the end of the day, it's still a team effort to make the decisions for what's best for the company.
It also, it gets down to company culture, which is so important. But I have this theory that company culture is really just a manifestation of the character and personality of its leader or leadership team. So if you are a leader who's paranoid, if you're a leader who's secretive, if you're a leader who is manipulative, I don't care how many workshops you bring in or how many company therapists or cultural experts, your company's going to end up feeling that way. If you're a person with an open heart, and if you're a person who is open to new ideas, if you're a person who has a strong vision, but is flexible in how to implement that vision, your company will have those kind of characteristics. The people you hire will have those kind of characteristics. And I think you'll have a more successful company.
I agree. It trickles down. It comes back to in a way you can't fake passion, especially when you're pitching to investors. When it comes to your employees who work with you on a daily basis, if you can't fake to an investor for 5 minutes, you sure as heck can't fake to your employees. Like you mentioned, if you're someone who's paranoid or someone who's uptight, who always thinks someone's out to get them or cannot properly tell the information that their employees need, it's going to trickle down. Especially, I'd say, and you probably agree with me on this, the first 5 employees are crucial because they're going to be the heads of departments that are going to bring in employees that honestly, as the CEO, it's going to be very rare that you get a chance to see and meet with those people. So it's really important that those people that they interact with on a day-to-day basis, they get from you the so-called modern word that we'll use, the vibe of what the company culture really is. And so it's really important, like you mentioned, the best characteristics, no matter how many degrees you have or what your pedigree is, at the top of your company, it's very important to constantly mention the vision of the company, what the end goal is, but also, in my opinion, for the most part, I'm a pretty relaxed CEO. The way I address issues, there are very stressful events right now with a lot of the regulatory issues my company has faced over the last year and a half. There are a lot of times where it does become stressful and frustrating, but at the end of the day, I do my best to be relaxed. I do my best to just take a deep breath, take a step back. In return, I feel that my employees and my startup founders that I've worked with have reflected that. And it has made for a really good environment. It's made for an open environment where we can actually share ideas without having the fear of having it shut down. And as a result, I feel that it's very important to build that really strong company culture. And I laughed when you mentioned it doesn't matter how many workshops you bring in if the structure is broken there. If you have a spine that's broken, no matter what you do, it's not going to resonate with your employees the way it does from the top down.
Yeah, I might disagree with you a little bit, Zach, about those first hires and how important they are. I think they're very, very important, but I think that you're going to find in most startup companies that initial startup team is a bit of a revolving door because if a company grows fast, the skill set for a startup, the skill set for managing, the skill set for this is going to be different. And there was this wonderful book, I can't remember the name of it, about the person who was in charge of HR for Netflix. And her attitude was to structure HR department, not for a lifetime job or career. She viewed it more as a sports team and how a good sports team, if you have a problem with a quarterback, you bring in a new quarterback. Maybe you got a new wide receiver who doesn't gel with the quarterback you had, so you got to change one of them. You're constantly shuffling your personnel to build a strong team. And if you're honest about that with people, and they did it really well at Netflix, you're going to have a certain amount of fluidity amongst the startup team and amongst the people who are working there. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. When I look back at my 2-year voyage with xBound, the people who I was listening to for advice 2 years ago are different than the people I was listening to for advice a year and a half ago. And they're different than the ones I'm interacting with today all the time because the company's changed. The people have changed. I've reached out to new people. What people were telling me back then, maybe it didn't work for me, so I went on to something else. I think you're going to have to, especially in the startup phase, have a very flexible attitude towards both your mentors, your advisors, and the people who work for you, and come to an understanding that those things are going to change a lot in the beginning years.
Certainly, no, it's a good point. It's a different way to look at it. For me, at least, it's like you said, it is a revolving door. So it's going to be important that anyone that comes in my opinion, does start to embody that culture, again, it's not always going to work out. So as
Right.
you mentioned, it's really important to have an open mind. Like, okay, I met this mentor. At first, he was really awesome, some good advice, but then now he wants to formalize terms as far as potential advisory shares or some sort of structure like that, but he's no longer adding value to the team. Like you mentioned, it's very important to be open to the fact that that might not work out just because it did in the past. And that's one thing too, and I'm sure from your previous business endeavors, probably something that's similar to my experience is that don't hold on to the past. If something, just because something worked yesterday doesn't mean it's going to work today.
That's
It's very
absolutely
important
right.
to learn to let go of certain things.
Right.
And so,
And I also think it's really important, and you mentioned this earlier, to constantly refer to your North Star, to your mission statement, to why does this company exist? Zave Smith Photography exists to provide beautiful images that are on brand and on strategy with a high degree of customer service. Exhilarate exists to develop brand strategy and marketing materials that bring that brand strategy to life in a very unusual and engaging manner, again, with a huge degree of customer service. The customer service aspect of all my businesses is huge. And xBound, we have a very clear mission: connect late career and semi-retired people, the businesses and nonprofits who can benefit from them. So if you have a clear vision, and if you, whatever decision you make in terms of even if it's funding, all these weird ass decisions you have to make as a business leader, what kind of trash cans are going to get, should all be an expression, or at least thought of in terms of your goal, your mission. And the mission, underneath the mission would be your strategy, and underneath the strategy is your execution. And all those executional decisions should be judged against your strategy and your mission. And if they're not fulfilling or helping with the strategy, and if they're not fulfilling and helping with your mission, then maybe you should be rethinking whether you should be doing that or not.
right. And one thing too, I'm sure you've seen it. I think it was Jeff Bezos said this quote: "Be stubborn on mission, but flexible on the details." And
I always think of businesses in a three. Chinese people love to number things. The 5-year plan and this plan. I kind of do the same in some small way. And I look at business development in 3 stages. The first stage, which in some ways is the hardest, in some ways not, is the idea. What is your idea that's going to drive your business? I got an idea for this new kind of fountain pen, or for a new kind of brand design company, or a new kind of recruitment site, right? That's the idea. And oftentimes when I sit and listen to pitches from people, oftentimes I have no idea what they're talking about. I don't get the mission. I don't see that.
They get caught up. They get caught up in the details of the business model. And all of a sudden, it's like, what are you selling? Why are you here?
There really isn't a business idea there. It might be a great charity. What I have is the $25,000 answer to the 25-cent problem. I remember years ago, a friend of mine, brilliant doctor, said, we need to start a company that would make a solar mailbox. I go, solar mailbox? What's that about? He says, well, you wouldn't have to bring your junk mail because the solar mailbox would have a built-in paper shredder, so you could shred your junk mail right there at the mailbox, so you wouldn't have to carry it in the house. That's a perfect example of a $25,000 solution to a nickel problem, right? So you see some of those. So the first thing is the idea. The second thing is you got to turn that idea into a product, and that is so hard, right? With xBound, creating a really high-functioning website that will let recruiters and people find each other in a really easy way, right? So that's the product. And then if you manage to get the good idea, and you manage to turn that really good idea into a product, then you got to turn that into a business. And that is the next area that is so difficult. It comes down to logistics and procurement and hiring and funding and cash flow, taxes, insurance, all that other stuff that make a business different than a hobby. So it's the idea, it's the product, and it's turning that into a business.
And it all comes back to your mission. It's very easy. I've come up with, everybody I'm sure has come up with tons of ideas for problems. Like, is it a solution for a real problem, or is it just, like you mentioned, a $25,000 solution for a 25-cent problem? And so, that's your first step, and that is the It is probably the hardest first step beyond the next two steps, which are very hard as well. But once you have that figured out, again, you got to put the product together, proof of concept, figure that out, and then actually build the business model so it is sustainable. So it can be a sustainable model, but it might not really be a solution for that big of a problem. So you might never sell it. The margins might make sense, the model might make sense, but no one is going to ever want it. So along all of those lines, it's so crucial that before you and anyone, whether it's money or time is invested, you have to make sure, and you got to talk to so many people, is the solution, first of all, is the problem real? And number two, if the problem is real, is this solution the right option for it? And then you go from there. And honestly, I'd say the majority of pivoting occurs during the product stage, because usually you do stay within that area, you stay within the mission, but sometimes the product might change. I know for my company, the product did change many times before it came to how it is today and how it was when I pitched it last year. And moving forward, like you mentioned, filing for the corporation, doing the board meetings, sending out notices, having to waive notices. There's all tons of crazy things that go into running, managing, and maintaining the business. Yet,
Right.
not even to mention all of the other sales plan and marketing strategy and everything along those lines. So it really is a very long list of complex
I think
problems.
something occurred to me, Zach, that is interesting. There is no roadmap for developing a product or an idea. They just come, right? Or not. Most of the time, not. Occasionally they do. Occasionally the product idea actually fits the times, fits the available technology and resources, and there's a marketplace out there. You're really lucky, right? But there's no roadmap for developing that, really. And there's some roadmaps out there for taking a idea and turning it into a product, but there are a lot of roadmaps out there for how to take a product and turn it into a business. Now that's complicated, but there are lots of people with expertise who've done that. All the MBAs and all the people who've run businesses before. There's a ton of books out there. There's a boatload of literature. There's 5 million YouTube videos probably. So, the first part, the idea stage, that's the magic. Somehow, as Bob Dylan said, I don't know where the lyrics come from, but I'm glad they come, right? The business idea, I don't know where it came from. I don't know how xBound, I could sit there and I could tell you the thing I was at, but why did it suddenly turn into an idea, So the idea is just, if you're lucky, they come and they're good. Most of the time there won't be. There's no roadmap for that, really. But there is a roadmap for taking that product and turning that into a business. If it's, lawyers or accountants or business strategies or leadership conferences and things like that, those are problems that you can solve as a business leader if you're willing to solve them and listen to people who've done it before. The first part, the idea and turning that idea maybe into a product, that you're on your own more. Good luck.
So yeah, and that's where a lot of the good experience comes in. But like you mentioned, running a business is, I think, that the actual heart of it, the filing taxes part, the incorporation part, the board meetings, things like that, those are pretty universal, especially if you're a creative entrepreneur and you're more in it from the idea side and more than the execution side. Bring in people that are going to make that job a lot easier for you. Focus on your vision, focus on your product. Because I don't think most people that start businesses because they're the business side, they're corporate executives. They're not really entrepreneurs. They can overlap. If they come up with some awesome ideas, they can certainly overlap. But at the same time, I would say the majority of people that are entrepreneurs, they are the idea people, they are the motivating, they are the ones who have that vision, who can talk to investors and pitch to them. But when it comes to managing the business, compliances, once you get to that stage, let someone else take that over, because that's something that you can teach. It's something you can learn.
You just said something, Zach, and you probably didn't even hear yourself say it, but it caught my ear. You said focus on the product. And I think that's important, but I think in some ways that's only a part of it, because where entrepreneurs often make a mistake, especially creative entrepreneurs or people in the creative spaces, is they get so involved in the product, they forget about who the product is for. You got to focus on your clients. You got to focus on the market. You could design the world's greatest film, photographic film. It's a fantastic film, light years ahead of anyone else. So what? There's no market for it right now. And there's not going to be a market for it. It may be a little teeny niche market, right? So not only do you have to focus on the product, but just as important, or maybe even more important, is focus on the marketplace. And that's what Steve Jobs was so brilliant at, was he could go out there and not just build the world's greatest MP3 player and be done with it. He said, how does this MP3 player fit in the universe of selling music and sharing music? And he had that ability to envision not just the product, but the whole marketplace in a way that very few other people ever have been able to do. So it's focus on the product, but more importantly, focus on your marketplace.
Right. Certainly. That's a really good point to bring up, because it's important to understand, like, hey, there are people out there that need to buy it. In order for the business to operate, there need to be people that use it, and they need to be able to be people that understand the product. Just today, actually, I was on my college campus talking to a bunch of folks that are old enough and have been using for myself. Most people that are watching know about my product, which is serving a tobacco-free and a reduced level of nicotine vaping product out there versus the competition, which uses higher levels of nicotine that is tobacco-based. And so I was just talking to a few people that are currently using these devices, that are using nicotine, that are addicted to it. And it's different, because we do spend a lot of time working on the product, working on the investor pitch. Sometimes we do, and I've been guilty of this before. You forget to focus on your customer. So it's a great feeling. It's relaxing for me, actually, that I can just sit there and explain what my product does. And here's what's available. And people are like, oh my gosh, that actually would be something that I would like to use. It's something I need. And that takes me back. It takes me back to when I started my company, why I first did it, because I saw a lot of friends using these products. And I'm like, there needs to be a lighter version or a completely nicotine and tobacco-free version out there. And that's why I invented Next. And so, like you mentioned, it's just a really cool feeling to talk to your customers and see how excited they can get sometimes talking about it. So yes, on top of just delegating the business side to someone who knows what they're doing, focus on the product, but yes, focus on consumers as well.
I think sometimes we get afraid of our customers. We get so caught up in, man, I developed this like unbelievable microphone, and I can't even pull it out here. Here it is. I've developed this unbelievable microphone, and it's so pretty, and it's so perfect, and it's so white, and it's so
round. A lot of effort, a lot of money invested, a lot of people telling me it's great.
And often someone goes, yeah, but I can't use a white microphone in my studio because can't flare the camera, so it's got to be black. And you don't want to hear that,
Right.
So
you're better off hearing it now than later. That's the biggest thing about entrepreneurs, is you can't be stubborn. If someone pokes holes now, listen, or else it will become a much bigger issue later.
Yeah. So I think sometimes I know I can get that way. Is I don't want my customers to destroy this perfect product I've developed and a perfect answer to their problem. If they only knew it.
Exactly. And that's seriously, all of us are guilty of it. I'll be honest. I know a couple of times in the past, I haven't always put the customer's considerations. I just kind of have a list of assumptions, and I would work off of that. But in reality, those assumptions should start to become reality, especially the closer you get to having a full-blown MVP, a minimum viable product or a prototype. I think it's really crucial to interact with your customers. Like you said, we spend so much time. Our product is perfect in our eyes. We love it. It's amazing. And then there's someone out there who's ready to sit there and say, you know what? Something about this is off. And it might be a small tweak that we can accept, but sometimes there's some fundamental issues that we have to address and fix. And that's where pivoting comes in. And really, the beauty of pivoting is you can stick to your mission. You can stick to who you want your end user to be. There's just a few nuts and bolts, sometimes bigger than that have to be adjusted in between. Like for me, the pivots that we've made is to better understand our market. Instead of just providing a nicotine-free version of our product, we decided to offer a few low levels of it, because in practical reality, the majority of consumers aren't able to use a higher level and just make that huge jump. So there needs to be kind of a pathway to do that. And for xBound, I'm curious if you have some situations where you've heard some feedback and you've pivoted, it really is the same thing. You
It's
have to
horrible.
adapt and adjust.
It's horrible getting that feedback sometimes. It feels awful.
It is. You got to sleep on it. It takes time. It takes time to accept it.
I think you just said something else that I think is very important about taking time. I think in the startup world especially, it's rush, be the first to market, be quicker, do it nimbly, do it faster, and then even do it faster than that. And that's all good. But I think sometimes you got to have a long view of things, and that it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. And you're not going to get it right. In fact, you probably only get it right, 20, 30% of the time. And you got to learn to forgive yourself for the mistakes you make. And so you can pick yourself back up and go back at it.
Absolutely. That is probably the biggest takeaway I've had in my company. It is not a marathon. I'm sorry. Yeah, it is a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's a marathon. It is not a sprint by no means. And it's true. It's about, no matter how fast you're moving, as long as you keep moving forward at a sustainable rate that you can actually continue. And I'll tell you what.
How's the company doing, Zach?
The company is doing well. We do have, just to kind of touch base on that, the regulations of the U.S. have gotten a little tighter. So we actually are going to do what a lot of pharmaceutical companies do. We are going to start by going to market in the United Kingdom. There are some approvals we're running through right now. They're testing the product itself, making sure that everything checks off the boxes, that it's good to go. And then once we had that stamp of approval, we're good to start selling. So we are going to launch a pre-order campaign going into different stores based around the UK and then selling directly on our e-commerce platform.
Excellent. Good to hear.
Certainly. And just tying back to that, as far as the sprint, if you talk to an investor, for example, for us, it's been 10, 11 months since we've had our event. If a company was doing so great back then, but they were moving at an unsustainable rate and they're now burned out, it's not a great look for them, especially if the company's runway is completely decimated, their savings and what they have to use. If you're working at a sustainable rate a year later, if our companies are still standing and we're doing well, it certainly is a really good sign, not just for the investor, but for the practical bearing that the company still exists. It's not bankrupt. And that's what's more important above everything else. So I do want to turn that around as we do wrap up the show. Zave, I do want to hear, how is xBound doing? What are some of the major updates that you've had and what are we looking forward to?
Well, we're just coming out of a major revamping of the back end of the website to make the data flow much easier. We're about to do we're implementing a user hack to increase traction, and that should be live within a couple days. And I built out a really good team of people. I have a bunch of xBounders. I got a bunch of people over 60 basically helping me out, except for one guy who's like 32 or 30. There's a woman named Eleanor Meals who has a lifetime of business management and sales, heard about the company, reached out, said, I want to help. I want to be part of it. The guy named David Quadricels, same situation. He actually reached out to me for advice about a company he was working with that didn't seem to be working. He wanted some insight, and I was able to provide that for him. And then I said, hey, but go check out xBound. And within the next day, hey, I want to be part of that. I think it's a great idea. It looks like a good execution. What can I do to help? I got a guy in Chicago who's running our social media content, who's probably, I don't know how old Michael is, but he's probably 5 years older than I am. And he's just very dedicated. These people just understand the mission. They see the importance of it, and they're pitching in, and I'm building a wonderful team. And I think over the next few months will be interesting. We'll either go somewhere or it won't. It's I don't mean to sound cavalier, but I think we have a really good future, and I think we're just about to implement some really cool things. And in fact, we've already have. We've built out a really great content library on the site. So there's all sorts of wonderful articles about hiring older people, the advantages of hiring older people, the advantages of going back to work if you're an older person. I always think of xBound, if you took AARP and Entrepreneur Magazine and had a date, we'd be the child. So, I think the company is doing okay. Is it going as fast and as easy as I first thought it would be? No, I really thought it would just like, boom, rocket ship out of here, right? I found out there was some reality behind all that. And but we're plugging away every week. We make progress, and I'm pretty happy with it.
That's awesome. And like you just mentioned there, as far as the expectations for how fast it could be, I think a lot of us are there. And really, it's never that easy, and that's okay, because it really does teach you to have patience, and things just happen. I've made tons of plans with tons of timelines that a lot of them we've hit the milestones we can control, getting certain work done. But sometimes when you're working with external companies or things like that, it just takes time. And one thing too, which I think is really cool, and that's probably why you mentioned it, your team is being run with your ideal candidates for xBound. It's being run by people that have the experience in the industry. I think you said you have one person in their 30s, but the rest of you, I mean, that's awesome. And that's
Hey,
really,
you,
that,
you
that
need
shows the mission. I really do think that's an awesome add-on to the company and something worth talking about, that it is run by people like yourselves that are looking for jobs, or companies that are looking for experienced people. You want an example that works? Here's xBound, and that's just terrific. That's awesome. I'm
yeah.
really happy to hear about the progress of it. And I'll certainly, for our viewers too, we'll definitely keep in touch off the show. I know we'll have to have a good sit down, meet up in person at some point, and
Yep.
I'll continue to keep some updates on how xBound's doing.
Yeah, and I'm curious about how your company's doing. We haven't talked in a while, so
Certainly,
it's time for a coffee.
yes, we
Or,
will get that
in
on
my
the
opinion,
schedule.
it's always time for a coffee, but
Yeah, those angel venture fair relationships, they last for a lifetime.
they do. Venture Cafe, Philly startup leaders. I mean, the one thing that I discovered, I don't know what our time limit is. So the one thing
We're
I
good
just
till, honestly, whenever, until we bore each
okay,
other.
the one thing I discovered about the Philadelphia startup community was how mutually supportive it is. It's amazing. I come from a background of advertising and photography, and the photography world is brutally competitive, and it's a world where the pie for high level commercial photography, the spend on that has been shrinking steadily for 20, 30 years, right? So you basically have kind of a Game of Thrones where if you get the job, I don't get the job, you eat, I don't get to eat. Even though there's a lot of commercial photographers in Philly who I greatly admire their talent and I think they're fantastic human beings, I basically hate them all, right? So the startup world I discovered when I entered it about 2 years ago, is one where if you succeed, I might have a better chance of success, right? It's such a mutually supportive world, and
It
it's
is
one
very
that's
supportive.
open to all sorts of people. I've made great friends in it, and people are always free to give advice. Anyone who's listening to the show thinks that anything I say it might be worthwhile and wants to reach out to me, they can. Because I've been helped by so many people and gotten such great advice and support in that community. And the startup community in Philly is a wonderful place to be. It really is a fun group of people, an open group of people, a really smart group of people, and a really passionate group of people. And it's always changing too, because people, come and go in it. But it's a wonderful community.
That it is. And for anyone who's local to the area, who's talked about starting a company, again, it's a lot easier said than done. It's been a great, I mean, you wouldn't regret a single minute of it, I imagine, Zave. I certainly don't. It's been just a great experience to learn. And of course, the end goal for us, we have customers that we want to target and make their lives better. We want to be able to show them that it's worthwhile. And like you mentioned, the Philly startup ecosystem is phenomenal. It's one of the best. I mean, I don't know any better, but from what people have told me, it's a really awesome experience. I've made tons of connections. And like you mentioned, there are tons of people willing to give you advice for free.
All right.
I spent all of COVID talking on LinkedIn. Hey, my name's Zach Starr. At the time I was like 17. I'm a 17-year-old entrepreneur working on this. Would you mind sitting down and chatting with me, going through my pitch deck? I've gotten hundreds of hours of free conversations with people that just want to help. And then if you forget to reach out to them, by the way, anyone out there, even if they're an investor that may have said no, a lot of the time they want to hear from you and see how your company's doing. I get
Right.
messages all the time. How is Wasser Innovations doing? And
Right.
really, they do care. And it's a great environment. Like you mentioned, it's different than when photographers are fighting for certain roles or what they're working on. But at the same time, with entrepreneurship, probably because I would say that it's probably because we're all in different non-competitive industries. But even then, there's another company in the area that's doing something similar to myself. And we sat down for coffee and had a phenomenal conversation, just kind of sharing, scratching the surface, of course, not too much detail, but just kind of talking about what we've noticed, what we've learned about the industry. And now that we have two different regulatory pathways that we're going down. So I guess in a way, we're not direct competitors. But even then, it's still very fun and exciting to just sit down and share experiences. And you know as well as I do, just reaching out to people on LinkedIn and investor pitches and getting into Philadelphia at 6 a.m. on a cold morning in December. We share those experiences, and we love talking about them. We love sharing with each other. I went up to almost every booth that day and talked to everybody about what their company does, what their background was. Even at the end of the day, we had a chance to do that once we had exhausted ourselves pitching to investors. So it's just a very supportive environment. It's an awesome place to be, as long as you got to put your head down, you got to work, and you have to put your money where your mouth is. And that's really, if you do that, you're going to be successful in terms of the social aspect of entrepreneurship and when you're pitching investors.
Right. Cool.
Awesome. Well, Zave, before we wrap up, any last minute advice for anyone who's potentially looking into starting their own company, or even anyone who's an uprising photographer like yourself? The first question.
It's funny. I could go on for hours about advice, or I could sit here and go, I have no advice, and both would be true statements. Everyone's journey is going to be a little different, and I just say, make sure your passion is there. But if you have a passion for it, years ago, my wife used to be the vice principal of our local middle school and high school. And every once in a while, a parent would come up to me because they knew what I did for a living back then, just photography, commercial photography. And they would say to me, my kid wants to go to art school, or my kid wants to become an actor, and I don't know what to do. I always thought he'd be a doctor, or she'd be a lawyer or something. And now they want to go to this creative school. What do I do? And my answer was, if they want to become an actor or a singer or a photographer or a filmmaker because they think it's cool, send them to business school. But if they're doing it because it's a true calling, if they're spending their Saturday night in their bedroom working on some song lyrics, practicing their instrument, gathering with friends and writing a play, they're out with the camera, whatever it might be, whatever that creative passion is, if they're living it and walking it, then you got to let them do it, because that's who they are. And I think entrepreneurs are somewhat the same way. There's this wonderful guy named Eric Corkhill who's got a company, God, I can't remember, NeuroAlert, right? They make this incredible device that helps predict if people are going to stroke post-operative and cardiac units. And this is Eric's, I think, 5th or 6th startup. And I remember one time we were on a Zoom about a year ago. And, I can see his house in the background in his room. I can say, Eric, you obviously are someone who's got a few shekels in the bank. You're not a kid anymore. Why are you doing this? And he goes, well, this is what I do. I start companies. So if you're that kind of person, you'll have a good time. You'll be successful eventually.
It's a roller coaster. It is a roller coaster, and that is an understatement by itself. Yeah. But like you said, it's about you have to put your head down and you have to work. It is a grind, it's an effort, but it's inspiring for yourself. You want to inspire your team. And at the end of the day, we all believe fundamentally what we're doing is good for society. And at the end of the day, it's truly worth it because we're in it for the right reasons.
Yeah. So if any of you want to reach out to me, I am extremely Googleable. I'm the only Zave Smith in the country. I think there's one person in Ohio with the same name, but if you Google Zave Smith, you'll find me. You'll find me in the photo business. You'll find out about our brand design company, Exhilarate, and you'll find about xBound. So if you want to reach out, feel free.
Certainly, yes. And if you want to share any contact information, I can post on our socials as well. If that's something you want to do, we can certainly do that as well. So, Zave, this is honestly the perfect way to end my Friday. I hope our viewers feel the same as well as yourself. Everyone who's watched this week, thank you so much for joining us. Zave, to yourself, I know it was a little short notice last week reaching out to you. I appreciate you being one of the first few guests coming on the show. I know there wasn't a lot of content I could send your way to prep. As we can see, the camera is also
well, hopefully your ratings won't plunge after me being on.
They're going to skyrocket after this, as well as with the camera adjustments that we're going to have fixed too. Again, everyone out there who has watched this week, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Zave, once again, thank you to you, and everybody have a great long weekend. We're back Monday. Stay tuned to our social media for what to look for and our next guest for next week. Have a good one, everybody.
Good night.